Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. Welcome to Propaganda of Toxic Feminism, the series in which I expose and debunk falsehoods, misconceptions and outright lies spread about the men's rights movement. So let's get stuck into it. Well folks, you're gonna hate me for this first one. Yeah, it's an old favourite of mine, the old gloss witch, back once again, one of the biggest misandrists on the internet, a radical feminist writing for the New Statesman, constantly telling us how evil men are and how, you know, we should all be pretty much wiped out. And this amazing article that she's written is on International Men's Day. Ah, boy, this one's going to be tough to get through.
This International Men's Day, let's all agree that masculinity isn't working.
Oh, so let's all agree that masculinity isn't working. Well, this is going to be interesting, isn't it? Let's continue.
If we care at all about men and boys, and if men and boys care about themselves, it's time to drop the pretense. It's International Men's Day, when patriarchs the world over count the cost of being the dominant class, find it to be unconscionably high, feel a bit sad, then carry on regardless.
Now you'll note here she sees all men as one class, and that class is dominant. And I assume she means all of them, including the homeless, including, you know, men with emotional or mental illness, victims of violence or sexual assault, handicapped men, men of colour, you know, all dominant patriarchs apparently. You know, those homeless people are they're just living it up on the streets because, you know, penis apparently. I wouldn't be surprised if she put something in here about male tears before we're finished. But anyway, let's continue.
Have a good one, men, for tomorrow it's back to pretending that when you say people, you mean women, too.
Oh yes, of course, yes, that's right, because men don't see women as people, do they? No, of course not, because we're all uncaring animals, aren't we? I mean, fucking hell. What kind of monster is this woman? She hates men. She has nothing but hatred towards men. She is really a disgusting creature. And it really saddens me that she has two sons, which she's raising. I have no idea how those boys are going to turn out, but it's pretty fucking scary. Anyway, let's continue.
I realize that this could sound harsh. It's not that I don't empathize with how tough it must be to find oneself stuck at the top of a gender hierarchy.
Stuck at the top of the gender hierarchy. Once again, she only sees the men at the top. She is totally blind to all the men at the bottom, including all those homeless men. She probably passes them on the street every day on the way to a well-paid job. I assume she lives in a fairly nice house. She probably walks past them, doesn't even see them. Isn't that interesting? Because she's blind to them. She doesn't see the men at the bottom. They don't exist to her. The only men who exist are those few men at the top. So fucking typical. Next.
Just as money can't buy you happiness, neither can the systematic exploitation of female bodies and labor. That's why, along with emergency aid for rich people, we desperately need an International Men's Day. I don't begrudge you that. I just wish it could be done a little differently.
Of course, because, you know, being male is equivalent to being rich, isn't it? I mean, you know, we just have everything handed to us on our laps, you know, which is, once again, kind of ironic. I somehow don't think Gloss Witch is poor or doing it hard. Unlike a lot of men who, once again, she's totally blind to. But let's continue.
The official theme for this year's International Men's Day is making a difference for men and boys. The unofficial theme, currently being pushed by A Voice for Men, is expanding reproductive options for men. Yes, I know. Reproductive options for men, at a time when 47,000 women die every year due to complications of unsafe abortion and 830 die each day due to preventable causes related to pregnancy and childbirth.
I'm a little bit confused here, I have to admit. How exactly is expanding reproductive options for men in any way harming or increasing the number of women who die every year from unsafe abortions? I'm not exactly sure how they are connected. I guess if anything, if we did expand the reproductive options for men, then you could argue that there might be less unwanted pregnancies, which might result in less unsafe abortions, and it might shave at least a couple of women off that number. And 47,000 is a lot of women. If you were to even get that down by, a couple of hundred, it would be something. And you could argue that expanding reproductive options for men might bring that number down even more. But regardless of that point, where it might actually help the thing that she's complaining about, I don't see how giving men more reproductive options is doing anyone any harm. It's totally unrelated to what she's bringing up. It's not like we can only work on one or the other. It's not like if we suddenly start working on more reproductive options for men that we're suddenly are going to make abortion illegal or something. It's just a fucking crazy argument that makes no sense. Next.
A Voice for Men are a right bunch of comedians, aren't they? Still, at least they're not the only MRAs on offer.
I don't see how exactly that is a negative thing about A Voice for Men. How is expanding reproductive options for men something to laugh at? Or, is that the most negative thing she can find about A Voice for Men? It's hardly damning. Wow, so that's the big smoking gun that she's got for A Voice for Men, that they want to give men more reproductive options. What monsters? What absolute monsters? I consider Dean Esme a friend, but Dean, if you're listening to this, I know you used to work for A Voice for Men, but I don't think we can be friends anymore, mate, because clearly expanding the reproductive options for men is just monstrous. It's just amazing that that's the very worst that she can find to say about A Voice for Men. They must be doing a pretty good job if that's all the dirt she can dig up on them. Anyway, next.
As most of us will be aware, and as these two examples show, there's good men's rights activism and then there's the bad sort. The good sort provides us with a through-the-looking-glass version of liberal feminism, led by cheery therapist types such as Steve Biddulph. It's all about making sure boys have good male role models, look up to their fathers, and keep rough and tumble play within reasonable boundaries. Not that you'd mind, obviously, but still.
Well, I gotta say, yep, that does sound fairly good. Good male role models is important. I don't see anything wrong with that. Let's have a look at the bad, shall we? Next.
The bad sort is all about hating on women because your ex-wife was a bitch, and now she's expecting you to pay child support, and how do you even know that those kids are yours?
Wow, so this once again is rather funny. She says the bad sort is all about hating on women, which is amazing considering she makes her living writing articles for a major publication talking about how evil men are. Yeah, that's just a little bit interesting, isn't it, that she doesn't see the hypocrisy in that. And why shouldn't fathers know if the kids aren't theirs? Women do actually cheat. Not all women, obviously, just like not all men cheat, but some women cheat, just as some men cheat. And I think fathers have the right to know that their kids are their kids. I don't see why that is a bad thing. Imagine if, and I know this used to happen decades ago and is unlikely to happen these days, but imagine that babies were switched accidentally in a hospital and a mother took home a child that wasn't hers. Should she be concerned about that the child isn't actually hers? Or should, if she found out, she should just not worry? I mean, a child's a child, right? No big deal. Apparently, only if you're a male. Next.
The major issues of concern for these MRAs are family law, biased, rape, false accusations, and violence, women's, that is all the issues with which radical feminism concerns itself.
Well, yes, obviously, if the family law court is biased, which we can clearly see from statistics it is, then obviously that is an issue. No law court should be biased. Now, I know that we live in a human society and humans are naturally flawed and there will always be some type of bias. But we should have systems in place to make those biases as small and insignificant as possible. Clearly that's not the case in the family law court. Clearly there is a massive bias there that needs to be addressed and fixed. As for rape, well, I would argue that both rape and false accusations of rape are both issues. We should be dealing with both as opposed to only talking about one. I don't see why that's a big issue. Clearly, if someone has been raped, it's an issue, and clearly if someone's been falsely accused of rape, then that's an issue as well. And the last one, violence, well, I would argue that violence is wrong whether it's committed by a male or a female. Unfortunately, in our society, we tend to ignore violence when it's committed by women and only focus on violence committed by men. And I'm not saying that we should ignore violence committed by men. I'm saying we should hold women to exactly the same fucking standards. That's all. When someone commits an act of violence, we treat them based on the act itself and not on their gender. And apparently radical feminism is concerning itself with these things. Well, only from a one-sided point of view, which benefits women and doesn't benefit men in any way. Fuck equality, right? Isn't that right, Red Femmes? Fuck equality? Yep. Anyway, let's continue.
Only played out in some parallel universe, where over 90% of violent crime is committed by women. Can you imagine the trauma of growing up male in a world like that?
Okay, so this over 90% of violent crime is committed by women thing is her idea of sarcasm, because she's saying that over 90% of violent crime is committed by men. And she links to an article by The Guardian, which is called "The Culture of Masculinity Costs All Too Much to Ignore." So, it's another all males are evil, all females are innocent victims type feminist bullshit article. You know the type. The type of thing that Gloss Witch writes in her sleep. But anyway, let's continue.
If, like me, you are both a feminist and a mother of boys, it's hard not to feel pressured to get behind the good version. After all, it's not as if you don't care about men's higher suicide rates, greater exposure to violent crime and shorter life expectancy, is it?
Well, I would argue, based on the numerous articles of Gloss Witch that I've read, that she does not give two shits about male suicide, greater exposure to violent crime, and shorter life expectancy. I don't think she gives a shit about any men. It's clear in her writing that she hates men and blames all the world's problems solely on men. She thinks men are to blame for everything that is wrong in the world, and women never ever do any wrong whatsoever. So if you actually believe that about a group of people, I find it hard to believe that you would give two shits about them killing themselves or being the victims of violent crimes or dying younger. There are very few white supremacists who say hate, I don't know, Jews or blacks or Muslims or whoever, who actually care that Jews or blacks or Muslims are killing themselves. That doesn't seem to really work that way, does it? But let's continue.